Welcome, everyone, to today's conversation. My name is Lindsay Young, and I'm the president of Aspens Media. If you're not familiar with Aspens Media, and many of you are, but if you're not, we work with businesses primarily in the distribution world to tell their stories and share their expertise. I'm going to kick this off with a little bit of housekeeping before we get into talking with our two esteemed panelists. Those of you listening live, please keep video and audio off, but we'll still want to hear from you. So, and I'll repeat this later because I think we're going to get a few more participants kind of dribble in here in the next couple minutes. But if you have questions, put those down in the chat that's at the bottom of your screen. We'll either ask them as we get them if it's relevant to the conversation that we're currently having, or we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. So we'll definitely get to your questions. So please feel free to throw them into the chat box. For those listening on our podcast, Attract, Engage, Grow, or on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. So let's jump into what our topic is today. Contributed content to trade publications. I also call them guest posts, so those kind of go together. Contributing content to trade publications is valuable for both the contributor and the publication, but it's important to understand what editors are looking for and why. So let's start by defining what I mean by a guest post or contributed article. So this usually falls under the umbrella of PR. We work with a lot of companies to write and place articles with publications whose audiences find value in them. Because of my background as an editor myself, I know editors get a lot of articles unsolicited from people who, while well-intentioned, may not understand what editors need to serve their own audience. I also want to do a quick definition of trade publication, because there is a difference when we're talking about this between trade publications and more general business publications like a Forbes. So in this case, we're having a conversation about trade publications that reach a line of trade. So in our case, we're talking about general industrial distribution, reaching multiple segments in the industry, which Mike here represents. He is the editor of MDM. This would also include publications like Distribution Strategy Group, Industrial Supply, Industrial Distribution, and so on. And then there's even more niche trade publications like Natalie's, whose focus is on specific segments. So hers is focused on the plumbing PDF world. So others might include electrical wholesaling, fastener news, the wholesaler, and so on. So today we're going to be talking with Natalie and Mike, both with a long history in trade publications. And they've been very generous in agreeing to spend some time with me to give their take on what they like and what they don't when it comes to contributed content from outside sources. In other words, if you want to get published, keep listening because we're going to take a little bit of the mystery out of this topic today for you. Again, I noticed a lot of people have joined the call since I started the introduction. If you have questions during today's call, please just use the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll either get to the questions when you ask it or at the end during a Q&A session. So I'd like to introduce our guests. Mike Hockett is MDM's executive editor, joining that publication in March 2022. And Natalie Forster is chief editor of Supply House Times. Let's start with you, Mike. Just a quick introduction. Can you tell me a little bit more about your work at MDM, as well as your history in publishing, especially in this market?
Sure. So, hi, everyone. Thanks, Lindsay, for having me on. I've moderated tons of webinars, so it's nice to be on the panelist side of this every now and then. Like you said, been at MDM as leading the editorial side for a little over a year. For the previous 7 years before that, I was at a competing publication, Industrial Distribution, and that's where I got my start in B2B there. Out of college, I was doing local sports writing for a few years, but then I learned I definitely like the schedule and the workload of being a B2B editor much more than I did being just a young sports writer in a small town. So yeah, I kind of jumped into B2B publishing in 2014, and it's where I think I'm going to be probably my whole career. So So besides industrial distribution, I was also running some of the day-to-day for a couple of different publications, food manufacturing, manufacturing.net. I helped out with a lot of manufacturing publications that all under the same publisher. But yeah, it's been a great move to MDM here, and just happy to be here.
So, well, thank you so much for being here, Mike. Natalie, can you share with us a little bit about your work at Supply House Times and some of your history as well?
Yes, so I joined B2B Publishing straight out of college. I spent about 3 years as an associate editor for a smaller trade publication that was more contractor focused, dabbled in some real estate publications as well. And then in March of 2020, I joined Supply House Times as chief editor. So since that time, I've learned a lot about the niche distribution of plumbing and PVF. We also cover the HVAC and the decorative plumbing side as well. So yeah, I'm really passionate about speaking directly to my audience, and I'm excited to be here with Lindsay, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about this.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalie. And to clarify, for Supply House Times is the official publication of the American Supply Association as well?
Yes, we are. We have a long-standing partnership with the American Supply Association.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you, Natalie. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in to kind of the bigger umbrella question. So what value do you and your audience get from contributed articles from outside sources? Mike, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So while we want the vast majority of our content to be staff written, it makes us look good. It makes us look like experts in our field. We certainly like to also publish well-written, contributed content that does educate our audience on the topics that we know are relevant to them. So it positions ourselves as being connected to other thought leaders in the industry. Like I said, I'm an editor of a distribution media group that has an audience of distribution executives. But at the same time, I'm not a distribution executive, and I don't have the expertise of working at a distributor at any point in my career. But publishing good contributed content shows that we are connected with those experts that are working with distributors day in and day out. So it just positions ourselves as a resource for good educational content in distribution. So yeah, even if we're not writing it, we still get that benefit from being seen as a thought leader out there. And then certainly besides that benefit of publishing content as a thought leader, contributed articles, they do a great helpful job of lightening the load on our editorial calendar, and not knowing that it just helps knowing we don't have to write all this stuff ourselves as much as we would like to. It's just a bandwidth issue. We don't want to spread ourselves too thin there. So contributed content certainly helps fill gaps on the editorial calendar. And just even more immediately, there's always going to be days where, the next day's feature for one reason or another kind of falls through in the 11th hour. So it's very helpful to have, at least 2 or 3 kind of contributed articles in the bank that we can draw from when those cases inevitably happen. Lindsay, you've seen that happen where you pitched me an article that I know is a good piece, and the timing has worked out where, yeah, maybe we have had, an article fall through, whether it's something we plan to write or something that was planned to get from a contributor. It just fell through for some reason. And then we've had articles ready to go that we can plug in to fill those gaps. So from just a content wealth perspective and for a convenience perspective, contributed content helps both those sides, and it makes life easier for trade publication editors.
That's awesome. So you're saying you guys are human. Things happen in the day-to-day that sometimes help fill those slots.
Oh yeah.
Good, and they're high quality, of course, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Natalie, what's your take on that?
Very similar to Mike. The biggest thing is to have content from industry experts. We as well like to have the majority of our content written by us, but I'm not a product expert. I'm not a technology expert in a lot of cases. So it's great to get really quality content from those industry experts and be able to use it. And then as well, Mike said, the workload, it's really helpful to look at your upcoming month and know that one of your articles is ready-made, ready to go, and it's not something that you've got to go out and interview for. So that's incredibly helpful.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, guys. All right, so let's get a little bit into the nitty-gritty. What kind of editing do you guys do when you receive contributed articles? Do you remove a lot? Do you change a lot? Mike?
It certainly depends on who the contributor is. We have some regular contributors that I just know they write very clean copy that's essentially turnkey upon arrival. Still, even those pieces, they might need at least a little bit of light editing to, to make sure the headline is, short and sweet like we like it. Make sure that the copy fits our editorial styling. And make sure that it's got a good, teaser, article description. And just some little styling things here and there. So for those contributors that we tend to get on a regular basis, those might need a little less editing just because I know what to expect from them. But there's certainly other contributors, especially those ones that might be a one-time basis where it's the only article that we've ever gotten from them. They might do a great job of getting the central message of the article across, but in some of the finer details of that piece might need a little more massaging to better articulate what they're trying to say there. So we tend to, we let that contributor know, hey, I think this section of the article could be strengthened by doing this. We basically just get across what our recommendations are to strengthen the piece. And then, 99% of the time they're totally cool with that. And then we move forward with our recommendations on there. And then beyond that, there's other contributors that they'll admit to us right away that they are not a natural writer, but they want to contribute something anyways. And they'll let us know that they're much better at articulating in an oral fashion than in writing. So they'll kind of give us that forewarning that it might need some just work to get in the right place. So there's those cases as well where, upon receiving it, we just know that it's going to take some more thorough editing to get the main copy, to articulate the way that the contributor had in mind. And then that same goes for contributors for whom English might not be their first language. We have some great contributors that English is not their first language. And, when they send us an article, you can definitely tell that just in the way that the article sounds and just some of the language they're using that, again, it just might need some tweaking on our end to fit what our audience, how they expect to read and absorb an article. So I definitely want to throw that in for authors that English isn't their first language. Naturally, there might be some editing involved in there, but as long as the content, the message, the meat of the article is good to go, it often the editing isn't that bad of a process on there. Again, yeah, it's headlines, teasers, kind of the URL for SEO purposes. Certainly, we do customize that the way that the way we want it to look. But I always like to let contributors know, here's the headline that I have in mind. A lot of times the headline that a contributor sends over is good to go. Like it's just good as it is. But sometimes, yeah, it just might need a little bit of tweaking to especially shorten it down to what we like to use. And just if we think it could use a better headline, we'll put that on there and then let the contributor know. So it definitely varies based on who the contributor is, but that's an overall view of kind of what can be involved, what we see on the editing process.
Thank you, Mike. Natalie,
Yeah,
what about you?
Same deal. So I'll try to add and not reiterate. So in addition to the things that Mike said, I'll immediately remove any very clear self-promotion or specific product promotional content. Especially if it's clearly for promotion and doesn't benefit the overall message of the article. There are cases where specifics, it might fit in there if it's benefiting the overall of the article. And then we have a style guide. We follow AP style, but then within that we have a specific guide that tells when we use an Oxford comma, when we don't. So we just follow that guide. And then I'll remove, as far as SEO goes, we really focus heavily on those first two paragraphs and make it SEO friendly. A lot of the articles that I get, the headlines are a bit long, so I end up using the initial headline as a deck or a subhead and then create my own shortened kind of catchy headline. So those are some things.
Natalie, could you go a little deeper? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm very familiar with style. I was quizzed and tested on it in college. It's just part of how my brain works, right? But could you talk a little bit more about what that means for those on the call who are not familiar with what AP style means, and other examples of things that you might change that someone might think, why is she changing that? Or why isn't she capitalizing that? Like, I want that capitalized. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for our style guide, we use headlines and subheadlines are both sentence case. We don't capitalize the first of every word.
Okay.
And then there's instances where if you're introducing someone, the president and CEO of X company, if president and CEO comes before the person's name, it's capitalized. If it comes after, then it is not capitalized. That's a really common one where I get people questioning why I decapitalize their title, and it's just a style guide. And it doesn't,
not because you don't think they're important. It's just the
yeah, exactly. And it doesn't by any means mean what they sent was wrong. It just we have our style that we want to match for consistency.
Yeah, it is just about consistency, right? Making sure every piece of content you have on your site follows the same rules, which makes it all look more professional, easier to read, cleaner. So.
And then just adding in, like, then there's little things like, some contributors, they're just used to double spacing, after sentences, little things like that, you do have to go through and just make sure that it matches the style that you use for, all your content you're already publishing out there. And just to follow up on what Natalie said about, some of those, like, especially executive titles, since we're writing for an audience of executives, there's so many, executive kind of just language in there that's where it can get just a little, not tricky, but just a little, a little bogged down, where you just have to really make sure that everything is consistent. Consistency is the key thing. You don't want to have a style, at some point in the article different from further down in the article. So just before we publish anything, we just do at least one last quick check to make sure the styling is consistent throughout.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that for people. For us editors, that's like hardwired, but not everybody, they want it to look good, they want it to follow the rules, but they don't, not everybody understands kind of the importance of style. All right, next question. What mindset do you recommend contributors have when writing for your audience? I'm going to let Natalie start this time. So what do you recommend?
I actually recommend having the first and foremost be educational. Whatever your topic may be, we're trying to educate our readers. That's what every single article that goes in, no matter who is the author, that's our goal. So obviously we want a mutual beneficial relationship when it comes to contributed content, but come in as an educator, that you're bringing value to the audience. And then the second most important thing is to know who my audience is, and look at the content that I've published before, look at other contributed articles that I have used, and understand who the audience is. And I'll probably start to repeat myself on that throughout the rest of this conversation, because that's my most important takeaway. And the previous question, we were talking about the punctuation and the grammar, and all that's fine. And it's really nice when I get an article that already matches style a bit. But if I have something that doesn't match style, has capitalizations, double spaces, but if it's really true content that helps my audience, I don't mind at all taking the time to technically edit through it.
Great. Mike, what would you add to that?
Yeah, those were kind of the same sentiments I had in mind. Immediately, I'll keep repeating value that Natalie said. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that I want, our contributors to have in mind. What is the value of this article, and what value does it have for the audience that I'm targeting here? So I think just keeping that value element in mind helps you stay on the, keeping the content educational as possible. When I get an email from a marketing person that asks, hey, we're interested in contributing this article, what guidelines should I follow? The very first thing I put in the first sentence is, we want this to be 100% educational. So we'll just kind of keep hammering that home, that it should be, be educational for the audience. They should learn something from it. And especially in that kind of introduction section of an article, that's where you want to demonstrate, here's what value you're going to get out of reading this article. So that's, even when we're writing our own content, that's something we try to stress is early on for a thought leadership piece, kind of establish, here's what you can expect to learn, what you're going to take away from this article as you continue on reading. So yeah, I would definitely just keep hammering home value and education. Like I feel like those should be the top two things that any contributor keeps in mind, when they want to write for our audience.
Thank you, guys.
I'll add just real quick, we'll probably get into it a little deeper, but understand the different audiences. For my case, we have sister publications. So I'll get pitched articles that also went to a sister publication of mine, which is completely fine. But if I say, hey, that's better for the contractor audience, my audience is a wholesale distributor. But if I keep getting pitched that same sort of style, that's whenever I'm more likely to say, okay, you're not understanding what my audience is. So just because it's not for my audience doesn't mean it won't be for another. And so it's just really taking the time to understand those different verticals.
And definitely, yeah, about understanding the audience. Like our audience is C-level executives, so they're used to reading a certain kind of style of articles where it's how to run a business more effectively, things of that nature that are very pertinent to executives. Whereas, if it's more of a consumer publication, something that reaches the end user, just the tone, the voice involved in those articles might look and sound very different than one that goes to executives. So just like Natalie said, you definitely want to understand who you're writing for and kind of what makes sense for that tone, that voice that you're using in these articles.
Thank you. Thank you for that addition, Mike. I think that's so important. All right, this is a big question. What makes you immediately reject contribution? Mike?
We already kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's promotional language. It can be just in the email that we're getting pitched to from a marketing person. If they're talking about this contributor that comes from a industry leading company or best in class solutions that they have, immediately that's going to be a turnoff. Because again, what value does that provide our audience just to know how great that this company is that they come from? So, and we already kind of touched on that about how, if the contributor mentions their company or product or their solutions, we can allow that only if it adds value to that article. So if it's used, if they're mentioning their company, something they did, a product they have, if they're using it as an example that, effectively illustrates a point being made, then sure, we will allow that because it might serve as a value added example in the article or the message that they're trying to get across. But if they're just, name dropping their company, plugging their product for the sake of getting their name in there, then it's certainly a no-go. Like at the minimum, we're going to strip that out. But like Natalie mentioned, if it's something that same contributor is repeatedly doing, we're gonna remember that. And like when we see that their name pops up as a possible contributor, it's that association with them being promotional. That's something we're going to keep in mind, and that's going to be a constant red flag if they reach out again. So yeah, it's I'm sure we'll keep repeating this the rest of the way, but yeah, it's promotional language, promotional content is definitely the first red flag. That's an immediate turnoff.
And to follow up on that, Mike, you mentioned like there is a way to do it without promoting your company if it's value add. And I often recommend you don't even have to say the company name, your company name, right? You are the author. It's in your bio if someone's interested in learning more, but you could use language like we worked with a distributor, for example, that was seeing this pain point because of X, and they used X to treat it, but you still don't have to say ABC software company.
Right. And
simple, right? You just talk about your experience in the industry in a more casual and direct way. That's
there's part of me that thinks like, name dropping a specific company, especially during an example that someone's trying to use, it can add credibility in a way to, actually say, like, if it's a really recognizable company that they're using as an example, if that's the company that, the author works for, I can understand that it can add some credibility that way to actually say, we at blank blank did this and here's what it did. But again, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. Like we'll really have to know that, including the name in there is necessary to add value to keep that in there. Otherwise, like you just said, there's plenty of ways to work around that and still effectively get that message across.
Get the message across, because a lot of these companies really do work with a ton of distributors who are doing really cool things, and they get some really interesting insights from that. So there's nothing wrong with mentioning that. just don't do it in a promotional way. So Natalie, what's your, I think we were talking about what makes you reject a contribution. Let's go back to that question.
Yeah, so I'll touch on what your example was great, Lindsay, and sometimes something I encourage is don't be afraid to use quotes. So for example, if a software company wants to claim, you know, X, Y, and Z about how great their software is, instead of claiming that in the article, go to one of your customers who is a distributor that's relevant to my audience and ask them for a quote about it and quote them in your article. That's something I do in my own writing. I don't want to make claims that Natalie says X, Y, and Z company is the best. I want to hear from others about it. So that's sort of a workaround that I encourage people to do. But otherwise, another red flag are claims. You know, when I get an article that's claiming that something is the best, the newest, the first, that's really something we have to look into before we publish very heavily, and we just avoid that altogether. And another thing that I will sort of reject right away is something that I've already done, and something that I've already done several times. An example of that is during the pandemic. Obviously, we had tons of pandemic content going out. I started my role in March of 2020, so it seemed like all I wrote about was the pandemic for a while. And there was a lot of, there started to be a lot of repeats. And, you know, even on late 2021, even on into 2022, I would get pitched, you know, articles. How did the pandemic affect your business? And while that's not a bad idea, it just had been done. And so that's where I think just a little bit of research, looking back on Supply House Times website, you know, have I done an article like that before? If I have, what's your new take on it?
Yeah, I think that critical piece, what's your angle on it? What's your new take? There's always a fresh angle you can take on it, right? Or there should be.
And yeah, just quickly following up there again, the timeliness is definitely a factor there. So like, you know, depending on the trade publication, they might already be booked out, you know, for the next month, maybe several months, as far as their editorial calendar and the next available date that they have to publish something. So when an article is being pitched, they have to keep that in mind of, is this article still going to be relevant 2 months from now? And if it's not, certainly, yeah, like it'll be passed upon. Even if it's a good piece at the time, sometimes it comes down to, yeah, just what's available on the calendar, and just just how timely that article is. So yeah, there's a lot of factors involved.
Yeah, great. Thank you for adding that. Sorry, Natalie, go ahead.
Sort of on the same note is something, if an article, obviously we always want fresh content. I don't want to publish something that someone else has already published. But oftentimes I'll get pitched, you know, an article, a byline that someone has published, but they just want to refresh it with something new for my audience. And it's pretty rare that actually comes across as a fresh piece of content. So I would just encourage people to really not pitch articles that have been published. And if you are, it really needs to be a lot different than what has been published.
Great tip. Are there common misconceptions from your perspectives about the whole process, about contributing articles to trade publications?
I'll jump in here.
Sorry, Mike, yes.
No problem. I've kind of seen both sides, where there's some contributors or marketing people that, you know, some of them, first off, if they aren't already familiar with us, they'll ask, you know, do we accept contributed content? But there's some that like get a weird assumption that, you know, that we aren't open to contributed content for one reason or another. And then on the flip side, there's, you know, marketing people that I'll keep saying marketing people because that's who we keep getting the most pitches from, but that they'll assume that like all we run is contributed content, and that we you know, run at anything and everything. And I don't know where anyone would get that assumption from, because, you know, editors, most of their job is gatekeeping. You know, it's, you know, filtering what needs to be filtered, whether it's contributors or their own staff content. Yeah, so I don't know if that's a broad misconception, but it's just kind of interesting to see the perception that from different, and I've seen this at both of the publications I've worked at, where, yeah, some might just think it's a free-for-all, you know, just they'll throw everything at you and see what sticks. And then others are just like almost too shy to approach you to contribute an article when, you know, they might have something really great to offer.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And I just want to point out, and I'll let Natalie kind of have her take on this. I love your definition of editors as gatekeepers. Never heard that kind of.
I mean, it's part of the job.
But
certainly
it's
not
kind
all
of
of it,
true. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's true. Natalie.
Yeah, not too much to add. I agree with Mike, but one other misconception that I know we're speaking to the PR and the marketer right now, but every now and then I think some people assume that articles are pay to play, that we just publish bylines
Yeah.
from advertisers, and we work really hard to make that not the case. So that's just one thing to clear up, that that's not the case at all. While we of course we want to treat our advertisers well, we're all about publishing the best content.
That is a
Yeah,
very,
that's a great point.
I've heard that before too, even from, people we work with who assume that, yeah, and that maybe we can, if there's anything else to say on it, but the connection between, like you said, like if you are an advertiser, immediately you'll accept whatever it is they contribute to publish on your site, which is not, usually
Right.
for most publications, for most editors, there's a strict wall between those two worlds. In fact, sometimes the editors aren't even really aware of what's coming down the pipe for advertising. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that or not.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that pay to play misconception, I think might be a reason why some, people just think that they can't, offer a contributed article to this publication because, well, we're gonna have to pay something to get it posted. Again, it all comes down to the value of the piece. If it's good content, that's what we're looking for. It's of course, we all need to make money one way or another, but on the editorial side, we're concerned with the quality of the content, and we're happy to, all the contributed content we run, we let them know that, there's not a price to get this published, that the only price you have to pay is the time and the thought leadership you're putting into the article. So yeah, just that pay to pay, I think, is a misconception out there, because I'm sure there are some publications where maybe the only contributed content they run, is from sponsors or just people that are paying to get it published there. But from what I've seen in B2B, the vast majority is there's not a cost to get something contributed.
That's great. Another question for you guys. I think the next question we had on our list was, should writers mention their brand in a contributed article? I feel like we've kind of covered that, but is there anything else you guys want to add to that or emphasize about that?
The only thing I can think to add is that, or what I'll tell people is, if they do mention the brand name a couple of times, a lot of times if a manufacturer specifically is contributing, or an agency that works for a manufacturer is contributing a byline, of course they'll have images with it that are product specific images. So I tell them, I'm not going to include this in the article, but in the photo caption, your specific product name will be there. So that's kind of a workaround and like a middle ground I try to reach, that you still get your product name in there in the photo caption.
Sure, and that makes sense.
And yeah, the only thing I'll add, will sound like a broken record, but it comes down to value. And of course, it's very understandable that they want to promote themselves, what they're doing, their latest and greatest solutions, and position themselves as a thought leader. And they understandably assume that name dropping, their company or what they do, the solution they have, is a way to connect, their name with their company and their solutions. They want to get that, they want to get that, tie in that recognition of their company name with the content that they're articulating out there. But Lindsay, like you mentioned earlier, that their name, their bio, their company name is going to be in their, in the about the author section as it is. And if it's a good article, if it does provide value to the reader, and especially if they're doing that on a recurring basis, they are going to position themselves as a thought leader. They're going to be seen that way just by having, themselves in the byline. They don't necessarily have to insert their company name and what they do in the article to get that recognition, to get that, just to make that connection, with the reader and, the value that they're providing.
Yes, amen to that. The one thing I'll add to that from our perspective, because we work with a lot of the companies that are contributing content to your publications, is that I often say that this kind of content is really top of the funnel. It shouldn't be viewed as content that's like, you know, in the sales funnel, right? Where you have the top of the funnel is more awareness. These guys are an expert. They understand the industry. We're contributing to the conversation in the industry. That's that top of the funnel. And that's where I feel like this kind of content falls. And so the second you try to insert kind of your brand and more of a pitch, you're trying to put it in a spot in the funnel that it's not, right? Yes, we've had people who have placed content with you guys who have gotten a call afterwards, but it's because they liked what they read, right? They're like, oh yeah, that really resonated. They gave them a call. But 9 times out of 10, it's a long game, right? 6 months, 12 months of consistent publishing to kind of become recognized as someone who knows what they're talking about and gets the industry and is providing value. So then when someone does have a challenge related to those topics, they might reach out. So that's kind of how I try to frame it to people. You're talking about top of the funnel content here. Stop trying to sell, you know, just establish yourself and bring awareness to the industry that, you know, that you exist and that you understand their pain points and you want to provide value. So I want to do a follow-up question to the brand question that I didn't have on our pre-prepared list of questions. Links. Some people like to try to add in a lot of links back to their site. How do you guys feel about links in guest posts?
Lindsay, go ahead. Sorry, Natalie, go ahead.
I'll typically, it kind of depends on what type of content it is, and what the topic is. If it's a subject matter expert talking about, you know, inventory management, something like that, then I would give them a link back to their website. But if we're talking products, I try to be really careful with links, because we don't put links back to, and the other products we publish, we don't put links back to the site. So I'm not going to do that in my contributed content as well.
That's fair. So some of it's about consistency and just the general website policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll definitely echo that. It's kind of a case-by-case basis, but again, it comes down to value. You know, if they want to link to a study or some kind of major news article that backs up a fact that they mentioned, certainly that can help, you know, what they're saying, add credibility to it. But yeah, if they're just, I have seen contributed articles where it's just hyperlink blue for half the article, and it's just like, it's hard on the eyes. So I would definitely say, if you want a hyperlink, I think you can, but definitely limit it to what's going to help, you know, just help add credibility to the article, things like that. And I wanted to mention, going back to if you should name drop yourself in the article, if in your article you are citing research that your company has done, like in-house, things like that, I think then it makes sense to say, you know, we at, you know, XYZ company conducted this survey of blank, blank, blank. Then I think it can make sense to do that, because you want to let the audience know here's where these stats and figures are coming from. So in that case, it's okay. Just like, for hyperlinks, I think it's okay if it does add value to, you know, a fact or a point you're trying to make, but definitely keep it to a minimum. Yeah, I think the less hyperlinks, the better, just because even from just a visual standpoint, you don't want there to be links everywhere in the copy.
Right. And I want to add to that the reader's not dumb. They'll see right through that you're trying to promote something, right? They're not dumb. And it'll probably turn them off. And I know I'm speaking really bluntly here, but you know,
it's true.
Natalie.
No, I would just add to your point that you just brought up, is put yourself as a reader or as a consumer of content. I mean, what's the first thing that turns us off is like ads blaring in our face, and it's the same way with the content that we want to push out. So just kind of put yourself in the shoes of a reader. If you're trying to get some informative content and you click over, if you're kind of clickbaited with a good title and then you land on an article that's really just promoting something, I mean, that's irritating. So we don't want to do that to people.
It's really irritating. Exactly. Thank you. All right. So positive. I want to know what topics, because you guys already mentioned that, like, if you've already covered something ad nauseum, right? Like, we've all written about really important, really valuable information related to COVID, for example. So, but can only write so much about the same topic, right? So so we talked about that, but are there topics right now that your audiences love that they really can't get enough of that you would like to see more of from experts who might have some specific knowledge in those areas? So Mike?
I mean, it certainly varies on the audience, the publication that's being written for, but just seeing what's out there happening, economically on the, whether it's on the labor side, our audience, everyone in manufacturing and the distribution, they are really struggling with labor out there, both with retaining or hiring and retaining. So it in some ways feels like we're beating a dead horse, that we've been covering this labor situation for so long and trying to provide best practices out there. But, our analytics show that it's still, one of the top content topics for our audience. They're still trying to navigate this labor situation and to, keep enough people in their plants, in their warehouses to get the job done. So best practices when it comes to labor, especially on the culture side, so many more companies are just being more cognizant of, what it takes to have an effective culture. And I think that goes across no matter what audience you're writing for, how to, foster a great culture, I think is always going to be attractive out there. Our audience loves to hear case studies. They want to hear from their peers about, here's something we did well, here's something we failed at, here's lessons that we learned along the way as we did this thing. And again, that's a case where you have to balance. You don't want it to be promotional, but at the same time, they might want to tell a story of, here's something we did that worked well or didn't. So you kind of have to just toe that kind of fine line there. And then just how-to articles, I think how-to in the headline is always effective, no matter if it's written for a consumer magazine or for a publication that goes to an audience of executives. So kind of how-tos that immediately lets the audience know it's going to be educational, even if it's something that's not super in-depth. People want to know how to do stuff, so I think that never hurts for the audience to see an article of, here's how to do this effectively, here's how to avoid doing this bad thing. So yeah, that's just a couple things in there. Case studies and how-tos are very effective for our audience.
And for case studies, would you agree that it's like, let's say a software provider wants one of their users to write, their experience implementing ERP or something like that. You would encourage them to not only highlight the good parts of that process, but also the challenging parts of that process, right? So it doesn't come maybe like this is a case for this, whatever. Yeah,
and of course no company wants to talk about themselves in a bad light, but from an individual author, I don't think it can hurt to even add some credibility to say, here's something we struggled at, here's how we overcame it. You don't have to just be doom and gloom on yourself saying we did a really crappy job doing this technology initiative. Talk about how you overcame it, talk about how you found a way around it. I think you can talk about your failures while also making yourself look pretty good in that fashion. So definitely articulate your failures along with successes.
Natalie, topics?
Yeah, I'll echo the economy. Any article that we're publishing that talks about the economy, what people are forecasting, that those always do really well. Anytime you can take a topic that you want to talk about, or even a product trend, and somehow relate it back to the economy and why that sort of product is trending, is a good way to go about it. Also environmental topics, electrification, geothermal, those type things are really popular. Sustainability is one that I kind of feel like we're beating a dead horse, but it's going to continue to be relevant. So we need to continue to find more specifics to talk about, new takes on, not just the umbrella of sustainability, but kind of get down in the nitty gritty. And then on the topic of electrification and geothermal, controversial topics. Obviously we're always careful about being controversial, but that's what people are talking about. I mean, I'm in an industry event right now where we're sitting at the table, people are debating these things. So that's what people want to hear about. And as long as you can write and present it as a non-biased third party, don't be afraid to touch on controversial topics, because they're always happening in the industry.
Awesome. Quick question. So I just asked you guys straight up, like, what do you guys, what topics and what style do you guys like the most, or what right now, but I would presume it's okay for people to reach out to you directly and just ask, right? Offline,
Yeah.
not even on this webinar, and just ask, hey, I'd like to contribute. I want to make sure it's really relevant. Are there some areas that your audience is really excited about right now, or that you're seeing more requests for more information around that I can help with?
Yeah, I get that kind of email all the time asking, we have writers that are interested in writing for your publication, but yeah, can you give us, 2 or 3 trending topics that you would like to see more content on? It can never hurt to ask that question to an editor.
Yeah, I like to say editors are humans too. You can just reach out and ask. You can just ask.
Definitely, and we're humans, and so probably my 2 favorite types of emails to get are ones that say, ask what our audience wants to hear about, and then the second are people who have done a little bit of their research and they send me a bullet list of 3 things that they are ready to write about. Because as an editor, I'm a creative person, but I don't have infinite ideas. So it's always great to, even if I tell you, sustainability is huge right now, and you're able to come back to me with a take on sustainability that I hadn't thought of yet, that's amazing.
That's awesome. Cool. I just want to remind everyone, since we're kind of already somehow, we have about 13 minutes left, and I do have some more questions that I have poised to ask Natalie and Mike. But if you guys have questions, those of you listening in, please just pop them into the meeting chat. If you don't, that's fine. We'll just keep talking. But if you do, just toss it into the meeting chat and I will ask these guys directly. And then, of course, after this show, reach out to, I know most of you who are on this call. So if you have follow-up questions, I'm happy to funnel them to Mike and Natalie and help you get an answer as well. So just don't be afraid to throw a question in there if you have one. All right. So what common characters, we have kind of 2 more areas to cover here. What common characteristics or elements do great contributors, because you guys both have regulars, what do they consistently provide your audience? Oh, sorry.
Sure.
We wait to be called.
Besides, providing great value, like I keep going back to it, we like our contributors that don't tell the audience what to do. We feel like our audience of executives, they're already being told, oh, you need e-commerce, you need ERP, you need to do things this way from the vendors of those kind of technologies. So if an article just comes out and says, distributors need to do this to succeed, like it's just going to be white noise out there. It's not going to be effective. Rather, they can say, if you want to do this, here's how you can do it. And again, it's how to is very effective for our audience. So I think the contributors that we get most often do a great job of not, shoving something down our readers' throats of, you need to get on board with this or you're going to, fail. Even if there's an element of truth to what they're saying might be completely true, but the audience is going to see that as an opinionated piece that's just white noise, like it might come from a software vendor. But that's not saying a software vendor can't contribute something of great value to our audience if they keep it, if they're not telling the audience what to do. I would rather them tell them what they can do, and then if they want to pursue that, how to go and do it. So I think that's the thing that I see most often being effective, is just don't tell the audience what to do.
Okay, so it's all about tone.
Yeah.
Really a tone thing, because you can reframe, like you just said, you can reframe that you must do this or die to something that's more useful, like, hey, this is something some distributors have done and have done very well and do da 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 da. If you want to do it, here's how to do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Natalie?
Yeah, similarly, understand what our audience knows and what level they are in their career. I'll get pitched some things sometimes that are, it's not that it's a bad article, but it's a bit elementary. It's not fit for the executives, as Mike said, that we're writing to. And then second to that, everything Mike said, I agree. But our regular contributors that I know, it's really about a lot about the communication they have with me and the relationship they have with me, and that they're not sending me a blanket email that they're sending 100 other editors. And I understand that happens, and that's perfectly fine, but those are the emails that fall through the wayside, especially if in the follow-up it's just reiterating the same email. Just try to connect with me, and then if I can build a personal relationship with you, there's trust there, and then, that's where that continuous content contribution happens.
Awesome. Yeah, I echo yeah, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I definitely want to follow that to bring up, yeah, like Natalie just said, if I get an email, and this is more for like a best practice for if there's a marketing person that's making those pitches on behalf of a contributor, if I can immediately tell if it's that same email was just copy pasted and sent to dozens of other editors out there, and there's a part of me that's like, I get it, they want to cast a wide net, they want to reach as many people as fast as possible, but definitely, if they can take a minute to learn a little bit about publication, what the topics are that are of interest to them, and yeah, it's more effective than just changing the editor's name, the publisher's or the publication's title, and sending another email out. If I can tell they put at least a little bit of customization in there, it just has a much better chance of not only me reading the rest of the email, but a better chance of me following up with it and at least considering what they're pitching out there.
That's great. That's a really good point. Before I get to the do's and don'ts, because I think we want to wrap this up with a little bit of like summary in the form of some do's and don'ts for everybody. But in terms of something I forgot to ask earlier, but you guys also, not everyone understands this, but you guys also prefer, to the point of when people are mass emailing the same article to a bunch of publications, you also prefer not to have something that's on your website, at least not initially, be on 50 other websites, right? Is that how you guys, is that your kind of perspective? You guys have some rules around that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Natalie, go for it.
No, yeah, I mean, my first question if I get, a case study or an email like that, I know that they're pitching it to multiple. So if I email back and say, I do want to run this, my first question is, this isn't running anywhere else, right? Because we don't want that. And that's kind of my earlier point on, I also don't want to run something that has ran, but we're just changing the title, or we're just changing the ending paragraph.
Exactly. Yeah, good point. Yeah, if you're going to publish something on the same topic in two different places, make them different. Different articles, right? They can have the same point, but frame them frame them differently, write them differently, have different examples, that sort of thing. Mike?
Yeah, and definitely each publication probably has its own rules for that, but we at MDM, we do publish articles that that same author might also be contributing to competing publications, but we're not going to run that very same article that they are. Like, even if we're being pitched that same article, same thing as Natalie said, we do ask, has this run anywhere already? Is this currently being pitched to other publications? So if a publication you're reaching out to is the first publication you're pitching that to, you should mention that. Let them know that I'm giving you first dibs on this. You can take it if you want. Otherwise, I'll then pass it on. But yeah, that's definitely something that is good to let the editor know that, if you are simultaneously letting a bunch of different publications have a crack at it, let them know that, that's what you're doing. Or if you are giving them the exclusive on that, at least the first dibs, it's good to note. Because yeah, like everyone has different rules, and to me, it doesn't make sense to run articles that are already published out there, especially if it's something one of your competitors might have already published. It would look weird if you're publishing it a week or two later. So our view is generally avoid that. And yeah, we work with whoever's pitching that to see what kind of exclusivity is involved with it.
Right. Yeah, it's super important. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left, so let's do some rapid back and forth with some do's and don'ts. Let's start with some don'ts. I'm going to kick it off because we've said this a few times, but I want to reinforce it, and then we'll just kind of go around. I'm going to say, don't keep hearing you guys say this. Make your piece a veiled promotion for your product, because readers are not dumb. I know I keep saying that. Yep. Readers are not dumb. They will read right through that, and it will turn them off. Natalie, you have a don't?
I'll say don't pitch me, don't copy paste your email from every other pitch. Even though I know that's probably a little bit more work on your end, but it goes a long way.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Mike?
I'm going to go a different direction, say don't misspell or like just get the publication's name wrong.
Oh, ouch.
In in B2B publications, I mean, there's so many similar names. Ours is Modern Distribution Management. We've even named a few of these other publications early on here. There's several, trade publications covering the distribution sector. They tend to have similar names. And, I still see it every now and then where they'll get our name wrong or confuse us with a different publication. And that's the most immediate red flag I can have. I can immediately tell that they didn't put in, the proper time to at least make sure that who they're pitching that to is who they think it is. So I'm kind of surprised at how often that happens, even though I know that all these publication names can be similar. Even with Supply House Times, I know that there's plenty of publications that have supply in the name. But yeah, it's one of those easy things that it's kind of surprising how often I get an email they get our name wrong, my name wrong as the editor, or just something of that nature.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's incredible that happens. That's like minimal effort that needs to be taken to at least make sure those two elements are correct. Natalie, do you have any other don'ts on top of your mind?
Let's see, I was trying to get positive and think of my do's. I'm sure I have another don't. This might sound a little harsh, but don't follow up with me a million times. Don't call me constantly. I really try to, especially with the contributors and agencies that I have a good relationship with, I try to always get back to everyone, but there's hundreds of emails and there are times where I'm just not going to get back to you. And, after a second or third time of you following up, and I hate to say it, but just take that as I'm not going to use your piece. And I've had people that will call me several times a week until I finally have to just kind of hit it in, and it's just the nature of it. So don't do that.
And that's just going to hurt their cause in the long run if you do that, so don't do that.
Besides being gatekeepers, I feel like half of our job is just sending and responding to emails. So if you're just further cluttering that email, we're just going to find it annoying.
Yeah, that's very, very fair. How about some do's? I have one that I want to do from my perspective because, we work with a lot of companies that contribute content. And I want to say this on behalf of you guys. Do think about the editor's job. Their job is not to publish your marketing pitch. Their job is to find value for their readers. So if you have expertise that will benefit those readers, that's where you need to focus. It's not about, Mike and Natalie's job and all the other editors in this wonderful industry. Their job is not to publish your pitch. So you need to think about, what their tasks are and what they care about. So that's on behalf of you guys. What other do's do you have? Mike?
We already, Natalie touched on this well earlier. Add as much detail as you can when you're making that pitch. Don't just give them a few headlines and ask them, are you interested in either of these articles? If you can put just a little bit of context, even if it's just, a couple teaser sentences that at least mention, here's a couple of the talking points that this piece is going to address, you're going to have a much better chance of them being interested in that rather than just giving what might be a catchy headline and hoping that they like it. So add the context that is necessary to get their attention.
Awesome. We do have one question that just came in, so maybe we should try to get to that before the end here. We have a question on case studies. So let's say you have a great customer case study. As we were talking about earlier, you're not allowed to use their name yet. Would you still consider publishing an article if we refer to them as one large retail distributor? So
I think I would. Sorry for jumping in, but yeah, I don't think our audience necessarily has a reason to doubt the legitimacy of, a case study of what's being put out there. I think our audience knows if this author is putting in the time and the effort to tell this story, they're not just fabricating, that it happened or anything. So I think you can try to provide as much, you can describe that company as much as you reasonably can without giving away precisely who they are. So if you can, define what they do, a little bit of their characteristics without giving away who it is, I think you can still do that effectively while not naming them per se.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Natalie, do you have the same take or?
Yeah, agreed. I use that language in my writing too, if I have a company specifically tell me that they don't want their name to be used.
Right.
Yeah, I think as Mike said, like, there's not a real good reason to doubt it, right? Especially if you're really describing something that sounds like a real distributor. So I think
I mean,
that's,
and you can get as specific as you can, like you can say one large retail distributor in the blank industry, like you can describe what their maybe their product focus is, something like that to give it a little more context than just being extremely vague.
awesome. Okay, well, we have to wrap this up. It is the top of the hour, but I want to thank our guests, our lovely panel again, Natalie and Mike. Thank you so much for joining us and for your candor and sharing kind of a little bit behind the scenes. It's been really helpful, I know, for me, and it's been helpful for, I think, people who attended, and I know it'll be helpful for the people listening in after this live show. So thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.